friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask-us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
All right. Well, welcome to the podcast. Just a little bit different today. We are obviously not in the same room today. Kirk, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Daryl, it is good to be here on the podcast. It's good to be at home doing this. It's Christmas week. Life doesn't get much better than this.
Is it good to be home doing this? I miss being across from the table.
I know. Yeah. I'm trying to choose joy, Daryl.
I think everyone saw through that. Everyone's like, nope. No one likes Zoom calls.
I was trying to choose joy. I just went and destroyed it. So I don't know.
That is my spiritual gift, is to tear people down. No, hopefully not. Hopefully that is my gifting. But you know what? It is nice to just kind of stay home. I got some tea going on right now. So, and that side of things, life is pretty good.
Good.
All right. So anyone who's listening to this today, they already know. So I was supposed to be preaching at Kitchener. However, Sunday morning, I woke up with a little bit of the sniffles, as it were. So I wasn't able to go. And so, Kirk, you didn't know this, but you were going to end up preaching at both sites simultaneously. Thank goodness for technology. So glad that worked out. I was praying a lot that morning that our internet connection would stay strong and it would work at Kitchener as well. So thank you for covering for me on Sunday morning. So today's conversation might be a little bit more one-sided, though hopefully we'll have some good back and forth on the topic of love. So we have been going through the Advent series covering hope, peace, joy, and love. This was basically the last in our Advent series, although for Christmas Eve, we really wrap it all up. But yeah, this Sunday we talked about the theme of love. And so, Kirk, I do have to ask you this very important question to start things off. Oh, what's so wrong with Hallmark Christmas movies? Like where's all the hate coming from?
So all the hate is probably coming from the amount of Hallmark Christmas movies my wife wants me to watch with her. There's just, I don't know. All right. They're, for the most part, pure, wholesome, but there's also this like little bit of tackiness and a little bit of obvious storyline in every single Hallmark movie. Like there is... I shouldn't say that. I watched one the other night with Shannon, and they actually kissed halfway through the movie instead of at the end. I was thrown for a loop. I thought that they just completely went off brand as soon as they did that. You
started getting up and like leaving the room.
Right.
Like the movie's over, 30 minutes in.
So I thought, yeah, it was, but I don't know. I'm just not a fan.
That is very fair. What I have learned is just to lean into the cheesiness. And so the cheesier, the better. If the movie actually has a good plot, I'm actually, at this point, I'm even disappointed. I'm like, no, it has to be even cheesier. Just the most ridiculous thing ever. That's what I'm looking for with the Hallmark type of Christmas movies.
I want like a Hallmark movie, like the sequel, so that you can see, instead of the happily ever after bit that you get at the end of one, you can see all the real life stuff that happens after they live happily ever after.
Okay, so I have to be honest here. So there are movies like that. So Netflix now makes Hallmark type of Christmas movies.
They do, yep.
And they make sequels to them. And the sequels, okay, the first movie was not that great. The sequel is definitely not that great, because now they get into like the real drama of their relationship of, oh, I wish that we spent more time together. I'm like, no one wants to see this. This is getting too real. Like, just move on to the next like happy ending. We don't want that for our Christmas movies. But yeah, those sequels are out there, and they personally, I find them depressing. They're not that
All
great.
right. So note to self, don't watch Netflix.
Yeah, that's probably a good rule of thumb to live by. Yeah, but so we're talking about the theme of love. So Netflix, Hallmark Christmas movies, they maybe missed the mark. So maybe look for something a little bit more with substance. So Kirk, I have to ask you this question. Like, how should we think about the idea of love? Like, how does the Bible actually define love? Can you just kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we could talk about this for a really long time, so I'm going to try and synthesize it down. I think that what you see over and over again in the Bible is love is consistently this self-sacrificing, assuming the best in the other person, living for the best for the other person, not looking for something in return from the other person. It's just a constant giving of yourself for the benefit of others. And there are different types of love in the Bible. There is, there's brotherly love. There's that agape love that God reveals to us. There's that eros love. That's that romantic love in marriage kind of love. And so there's all kinds of different expressions. But whenever I'm working with couples in counseling, one of the things that I will do is I'll open up to 1 Corinthians 13 and I'll just review it. And, couples will often say to me, we really love each other. There's just this one or two things that we're really struggling with. And I'll open up to 1 Corinthians 13 when we'll walk through it together and just ask the question, let's be honest, according to God's standard of love, do we actually really love each other? And it's a really eye-opening moment for most people, including myself, when it comes to this conversation about love, because we sometimes have a really low bar of what love really is.
Yeah. So like, even connected with that, love that description of what, like, biblically what love is supposed to look like. And so just to press that a little bit further, what would you say, like, how does our culture, what does it get right and what does it tend to get wrong about the idea of love?
Yeah. So here's one of the things I think that our culture sometimes does better than Christian culture does. I think our culture elevates the idea of romantic love better than Christians tend to elevate the idea of romantic love. And I think that Christians, not that we should adopt everything the culture teaches about romantic love, but I think that we can learn some things in terms of the value that romantic love has in relationships and in marriages from the culture. But the flip side is, I think the culture gets a lot of other things wrong, because it tends to be the message of you pursue love so you can get something in return. It's kind of this trade-off, this deal, and ultimately it's more about loving yourself than it is about loving other people. And there's this kind of reversal of priorities where loving yourself becomes the first priority and people become a means to an end to satisfying your desires and your needs, versus God's definition of love, I think, is a sense of I'm loving other people even if I'm not getting something in return from those people. And it is a picture of sacrifice. It is a picture of truly giving of yourself for the benefit of others, no matter what the return is on that investment. Yeah.
And it's interesting. That was actually something in the message that I was preparing. I was going to press on that a little bit more of that sacrifice, or the way I was going to describe it is the pouring out of yourself to the other person. And so actually my discipleship group right now is going through a really great study together. And we just talked about this idea of love. And the way it was described in the study is how in the Trinity, that the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, that they're always pouring out love to one another. And so, the Father to the Son to the Spirit to the Father, and we see this imagery all throughout Scripture, that they're always pointing to one another. And then as we're created in God's image, now, this is something that we also do, is that we pour out our love. It's this sacrificial love, pouring it out to the people around us, or to our children, to our spouse. This is this picture of love. And it is sacrificial. It's not pouring into me, it's me pouring out to others around me. But I find it interesting, when you say maybe the world does romantic love a little bit better than Christians. I'm a little bit surprised when you say that, because I walked by the church library and there's tons of romantic novels. For some reason, always set in the 1800s. I'm not sure. Is that the most romantic period in history? A lot of horses and wagons going on.
You are, man. I thought I was going to be public enemy #1 over Hallmark Christmas movies. You are just opening up yourself, man. His email address is darrell.s@forwardchurch.ca.
Bring it on. Send me the emails. Tell me your favorites. I won't read them. Hey, if you guys love them, read them. That's great. But I do find that interesting. Is there anything that you'd say that we need to recapture from maybe how the world around us? And I say that because I feel like often when we preach, when we teach people, sometimes we dog on the culture, maybe just a little bit too much. It's the world has it all wrong. The Bible has it right. But we also need to affirm there's this common grace. Sometimes the world can, to put it this way, is the world should stumble across truth as they're trying to figure out, apart from God, how best to live. And it's important for us to affirm those moments where hey, actually we can agree upon this right now. And so I feel this is a good touch point of we should all agree that love is good, and romantic love, that is something that we should be affirming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the sheer volume of songs that have been written about love that are not Christian songs would tell you that the world loves to talk about love. This is not a new topic. It's not a uniquely Christian topic. But it is something that was created by God, and it is designed by God, and He's the one who defines what love looks like. And so I would agree with what you're just saying, in terms of not feeling like we've got the market cornered on what love means or looks like. And, we would all agree the Bible is the place to go to find love. I just find that as Christians, we don't always go to the Bible to give us a description of everything related to love. And so, for example, I was doing some studying the other day about human sexuality and thinking through on this some more. And I thought, other than don't have sex before marriage, how many people have had their view, how many Christians have had their view of sexual love shaped by a movie, a book, pornography, all the things in a non-Christian environment that have taught Christians even what romantic love, what sexual love looks like. And the best we can come up with is don't have sex before marriage. And I think that the Bible talks a lot more about this kind of love than what we give it credit for. And so I think that's an example of where we could do better and even redeem the distortions of romantic and sexual love that the world goes for, and we can actually bring some clarity of God's true vision for that area of our lives.
Yeah. Do you feel like maybe if there's two different directions you could go in when you think about love. That could be an error on both sides. One side would be to make love overly emotional, and then on the other side, that love is overly about duty. I love my wife because we got married, and so that's it. Like that's duty versus. And so when you talk about this, I'm like, I wonder if Christians, tell me if you agree or not, like, is it that Christians tend to maybe skew a little bit more towards duty, and maybe the world skews maybe a little bit more towards the emotional side of love? Are those two things that we need to be aware of, or?
Yeah, I don't know if I would blanket it as Christians and non-Christians. I think personality style.
Yeah.
Depending on your personality type, you may tend towards one of those two extremes. And because I know lots of Christians who lean towards the emotion of love and have no sense of the duty of it, and I know lots of non-Christians who have all kinds of ideas around the duty of love, but really feel nothing for the people around them. So I think it might have to do more with our personality type than our faith.
Yeah, but in the end, I mean, love is so powerful. Like, as you said, like, there's so many movies and songs about it. And what I find really interesting in your message on Sunday, you had this phrase, I had to write it down. You said that love is profitable. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think I've always heard this other phrase. This phrase I've always heard, like when around like marketing, whatever, is that sex sells. So you just got to make, your advertisement, your movies, whatever, kind of spicy, and people will watch it. Do you think that there's a difference between those two ideas, between love is profitable and the phrase sex sells?
I think I don't know that there is a lot of difference, because I think at the core of why love is profitable is because the kind of love that we're looking for that's generating money still comes back to being self-serving. It's like, we're not attracted to a movie where it's only one person who's just giving of themselves over and over and over again and sacrificing of themselves. And, we're not all sitting there feeling warm and fuzzy about the love in that movie.
It sounds like a downer of a movie.
It does, right? Like, hey, I'm giving of myself and everybody hates me and ignores me and doesn't really care about me, but I'm going to keep loving these people. It's not a movie that sells money. We're attracted to the movie where the two people come together and they fall in love, and there's that connection of giving to each other. And honestly, the idea of sex selling is the same idea. Sex sells because it's what the gratification that I want to receive from participating in some type of sexual activity, whether that's watching porn, buying certain books, or whatever. It's still about gratifying me. So I think there is a link between both of those statements.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, it's kind of interesting. Like, you talked about how more Canadians go onto like dating websites versus real estate.
Yep.
And that hit home, because I mean, that's how I met my wife, was through a online dating. Surprise, surprise, it works. But it was interesting when I was on there, like, I had to think like really hard about this. Like, you see people's profiles, and I talked with other people who've done like online dating, of like, to make sure you never get into the mindset of like, this is like consumerism, or like, as you said, like, it's self-gratification, like just trying to find, that person who completes me, but actually view people as people, which is really hard when like you're just seeing like profiles on there. It's so easy to fall into that trap. But that seems to be like so much of the world, the marketing is around just this kind of make yourself feel better. And you're right when you say the movie plot where the person just keeps on giving of themselves, that, to be honest, that sounds like the beginning of a movie. Like, I would expect there would be a turn where something else would happen, but that's, biblically, you see the other side of the picture where they just keep on giving and that is maybe more true to the heart of Christ. So
yeah, and sometimes we do get to receive love from other people, right? Like sometimes there are people who genuinely respond to our love and they love us in return, whether that's a spouse, whether that's your kids, whether that's friends. You do get to experience a sense of love. But I think the danger we often get into, and I kind of alluded to it on Sunday, is we get into a sense of entitlement.
mm-hmm.
You owe me love. You owe this to me. And I don't think entitlement is the place for us to live and exist as Christians. I think every good gift is from God, and we don't deserve any of it, including the gift of love. And so we should never take it for granted when we do get to experience love. And I think ultimately it also reminds us to keep coming back and remembering that only Jesus can give us perfect love.
Mm-hmm.
No human being is capable of measuring up to the standard of love that Jesus can give you.
Yeah. So I found it really interesting in your message when you said that the word love is used so often throughout the New Testament. And you kind of zeroed in on the one word, agape. And I know in Greek, like there's other words that we can use for love as well, but you said it's used somewhat like 200 times in the New Testament. And so can you just expand on that again of like, what is God trying to tell us? Clearly something if he brings up the idea of love that often.
Yeah, I think whenever the Bible repeats something over and over again, it's always trying to get our attention. It's always trying to emphasize the point for us. And I think there's a couple things for us to take into account. The fact that it's talked about that many times. One is talking about love and actually being loving are two very different things. And I think God wants to continue to bring this topic in front of us, to keep shaping us and to keep refining us to be the loving people that he wants us and has created us to be. And so we need to constantly confront our selfishness and constantly confront our twisted and distorted views of love and align it up with what the scripture teaches about what love is and what love looks like. So I hope that by just making that point on Sunday, my hope is that people never get tired of studying love from the Bible, that we allow God and his Spirit to constantly check our hearts and our lives, our motives, and see, are we really being loving people? And then that we surrender ourselves to being conformed into the image of Jesus as in becoming more loving people.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And it kind of goes back to when I first asked you that question of, can you define love? And you said like how much time do we have?
Yeah.
It's almost like you have those 200 examples and references to love because love needs that many times to be explained, defined, lived out throughout the New Testament. And hopefully as we study it, that we would slowly but surely get a better grip of what love actually needs to look like in our context right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, and it made me think, Andy Stanley, most of our listeners will know who this guy is. He's a bit of a big deal down in the States, first or second largest church in the States. And he wrote a book called Irresistible a couple years ago. And I read this book and I thought he brought up some really good points. And as with most books, sometimes I wonder, if he could have explained this a little bit more. And so he talks about the idea of love. And he spent a few chapters on this of the idea that love is supposed to be our moral and ethical compass. And I thought that was a really interesting point. He said that when we aren't sure what we're supposed to do, we simply need to do what is loving. And so, Kirk, my question to you is, do you agree with that? Is there anything that you would add or change to that description of how we're supposed to apply love to our lives?
So first of all, I'll say this. Andy Stanley is a far smarter man than I am. And so anything I'm about to say should not be construed as Kirk criticizing Andy Stanley, the man. I think what I would say is we can. I can appreciate the heart of what he's trying to communicate, or what I think he's trying to communicate. And I would actually agree. Like, I think Jesus confirms that when he tells us what the great commandment is. But I think the what's missing in that space is trying to understand, like, well, what is that love ethic that you're going to follow? What we just talked in this podcast about various definitions of love and how different people have different perspectives of what love is. So at some point, you still have to decide what's the love ethic that's guiding you and helping you to make those decisions of love in your relationships and your interaction with other people. So is this God's view of love? Is this how God defines love in the Bible? Or is it something else? Is it my own twisted, distorted view of love? And I've worked with enough people, and I've looked at my own heart enough times to know that we tend to default to a bit of a twisted, distorted view of love. And so if I use that as my only guide of what does my heart say in this moment it means to love, I'll probably miss the mark of what it really looks like to love as defined in the Bible. So yeah, I agree with the heart of what Andy Stanley's saying, but I would probably add some layers to it just to try and define what is that ethic of love that's going to guide us.
Yeah, and I don't think that Andy Stanley would disagree with anything you just said. And as anyone, when you're writing a book, there's only so many words you can put in there. Yeah. But I always thought of that as I was reading through this book. I'm like, explain this a little bit more. Maybe he'll do that in his follow-up book. Maybe he already has. He's written a lot. So yes, yeah. But I thought that's such an important thing, is love is meant to be this compass in our lives. And, if we're following like biblical definitions of love, that is going to be a far better way for us to live our lives. And yet, like, there's this tension of how we're meant to be loving. And you said this, choosing love means that you are honest and compassionate. And you dug a little bit more. You talked about living with grace and with truth. So can you expand on that again, of like, what does it look like for us to walk the line between this grace and this truth?
Yeah, I think that for most people, walking the line between those two things actually means knowing which way you tend to default yourself. So I talked to some people after Sunday morning, and they said, yeah, I'm the person who defaults to the grace and compassionate side. Like, I just don't want to be honest with anybody about anything. And then, there are others who they live to wake up in the morning and correct everybody because they've convinced themselves it's the most loving thing to do. And so I think being honest with your default as a human is the starting point. And then understanding that you will need to learn to kind of almost do the opposite of your default. So if you're compassionate by nature and gracious by nature, it's going to feel like hard work for you to confront other people with their actions. And so you're probably not going to go to the other extreme of being a harsh person. You're probably going to become more in the middle of being that person filled with grace and truth. And the same thing exists for the person who's more harsh and wants to correct everybody about everything. If you work hard to become more compassionate with the Spirit of God's help, you're probably not going to go all the way to the other extreme of only being grace filled. You're probably going to become more in the middle of being that person filled with grace and truth.
Do you mind sharing with us what is your default?
So my default actually is different depending on the environment I'm in.
That's fair.
I've had environments where my default has been to be more harsh. And God's been teaching me what it means to be more compassionate and gracious. I've got other environments where I just don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to I like to be liked. And so I don't want to say anything. We used to have some neighbors. We lived in a duplex. And so we had this attached home. We had neighbors who loved to play loud music at 2:00 on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning. We have little kids. And Shannon was like furious. She's like, I'm calling the police. I'm going to go over and bang on their door next door. And I'm going to tell them to stop doing this because we got kids here. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, don't do that. We don't want to do that. We need to preserve our witness to our neighbors. Let's not talk to them about these things. And so we had this kind of conflict even between Shannon and I at times where I was way too passive and trying to be nice and gracious. And she was on the other end of, I'm just going to fix this and stop this now. And so, yeah, I think for me, it just depends on the environment that I'm in.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I know for myself, I definitely tend to land naturally onto the side of truth. And so it's to the point where like I'll be in a conversation with someone and they'll say something factually not true. But I know it's not the time. It's not the time to correct them. It's just nope, and just let it slide. They just keep on talking. And it's almost to the point where I can't hear anything else that they're saying because like I just need to correct them. And I've been working on this. And I'll come home and I'll say to Steph, I'm like, you'll never believe this. Someone said this and I did not correct them. They're like, wow, I'm really proud for you. You're growing as a human being. I'm like, yes, I'm winning. So depending on the context, again, that can be really hard. And to be fair, I don't think I'm successful every time, but I think that's so good to know, like where your natural tendency is towards, and to, if we want to strike that balance, you have to be honest with yourself. And so there are times though where we do need to make sure that we are speaking the truth. And you really touched on this in your message about how speaking the truth can actually be the most loving thing that we can do. And so you said that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to be honest and confront the person who has sinned against you. And I thought that was really powerful. I want to dig onto that a little bit more. What does that mean for a relationship that's in trouble, or when there is abuse going on? What does love look like in a situation like that?
Yeah, so I will say that if a relationship is in deep trouble or there's abuse that's happening, it absolutely needs to be confronted and dealt with. Like you cannot hide this. There's too much at stake. The value of you as a person made in the image of God is at stake. And in worst case scenarios, someone's life sometimes can even be at stake. And so, we cannot allow those things to carry on. But I would also say that many times when you're in that spot where your relationship is in trouble, or there's abuse happening, a lot of times you may need to bring other people in to be an advocate for you. Because it may become even more dangerous for you to be the one that communicates directly to the person and talks about the sin that's been committed against you. That you need to bring other people in who, whether it's people who are from the legal field, if that's necessary, or whether it's spiritual leaders who need to step into the story, or friends or other family members. Every story is unique and different, and figuring out who the right people are to step in is going to be unique to the story, I think. But I think you need to spend some time being honest in a confidential conversation with somebody about what's going on, and work together towards how are we going to confront the sin that's being committed in this relationship.
Yeah. And I feel like, and I've been a part of conversations about this far too often, where it just seems like that people suffer alone for a long time. And just to affirm that again, of the need for community to come in and to actually confront when things, like, especially when you're dealing with an issue like abuse, whether it's physical or verbal or anything like that. And that love isn't just that we ignore those things and just say, no, you just love your spouse regardless of it. Like, love actually means you don't let that to continue.
That's right.
And especially in the church community, to be a community that says, like, we'll help and support people as they deal with issues like that.
Yeah, and someone might say, how is that loving? Like, if somebody ends up in jail because I confronted them, or if our marriage falls apart because I confronted them, how is that the loving thing to do? And here's the simple answer to that question. It's the loving thing to do because sin has been committed and Jesus came to set people free from sin. So in order for people to be set free from sin, they have to confront the reality of their sin. They have to allow God to confront the reality of their sin, and then allow God's grace to enter into the story and begin to change that person's life. That's why it's the most loving thing to do. It's not the easiest thing to do, because life could get messy in those moments, and it could get messy for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
But it's the most loving thing to do because it's the path that leads towards the good news of Jesus coming into the story.
Yeah. But if you never confront, you never give the person an opportunity to repent and change.
That's
and
right.
Really all that you're doing is allowing just judgment at the very end before the throne of God.
Yep.
And like, that's the worst thing that someone could encounter is that type of judgment.
Yep.
Like, the grace that we receive right now is that in this life, in this moment, you have that opportunity to change.
Yep.
And I think that's when you approach confronting someone that way, has the greatest potential to actually change them. And I think it's important to think not just in terms of like the biggest, like, abuse, whatever, like even down to like the smallest things in a relationship, to be able to say, like, hey, I can't really track with you there, like, and this is why. And again, like, that brings an opportunity to continue to change and be transformed into the image of Christ.
Yep, absolutely.
And so, I mean, when we talk about this of repentance and being transformed like Christ, something that came up in the passage that we're studying on Sunday morning, Matthew chapter 1, we talked about how Joseph was willing to obey God and he desired to love his wife, Mary. What is that connection between choosing love and choosing to obey God?
Yeah. So I think that the only way that you can actually choose love is to choose to obey God, because God's this is going to sound philosophical for a second, so bear with me. But if God is the creator and the originator of love, if God is the one who's commanded us to love, and he has actually said that we love him if we obey his commands, that obedience to his commands is an expression of love to God, then every time we choose love with other people, we're actually first and foremost, we're choosing to love God. And so when you see it through that lens, it is what actually gives you the strength to keep loving people in any of life's most difficult circumstances, because at the end of the day, it's not, the person is not the final recipient of your love. It's God who is the recipient of your love. And you know that God continues to pour out his love back to you, even if the person in front of you is not reciprocating the love. So keeping your eyes focused on a love for God is what's going to equip you, shape you, motivate you, give you the strength to keep going and persevering in loving the people around you.
Awesome. So as we wrap things up today, I just want to ask you two final questions. when we talk about this idea of love, sometimes it can become just really philosophical, theoretical. Help us to understand how this actually plays out in our lives. How are we supposed to show the love of Christ, and how are we meant to experience the love of Christ throughout our week? Can you just give us a couple ways of how we can approach both those, of showing love to others and also experiencing the love that he pours out to us?
So I'm going to start with experiencing love from Christ, and then I'll flip it around into how we show love. Here's how I think you experience the love of Christ. First of all, pay attention to God's mercies around you every day. Every day, every moment of every day is an opportunity to experience something from God, some kind of goodness, some type of faithfulness from God in the midst of every day. That's incredibly important, just to pay attention to God's love towards you. And then reflect on the realities of what Jesus has done for you. I was the other day, I was leaving the office, and it was a bit of a crazy day, and my mind was going a mile a minute. I was thinking about a million things, and I had a whole bunch of stress going on. And I turned on the radio in the car, and the song "Silent Night" was playing. And it was just kind of this invitation to exhale, this kind of invitation to stop and pause and gaze on Jesus. And I just thought, yeah, like I needed that. I needed the space to be able to, by focusing on Jesus and his love for me, suddenly all the anxiety and the stress and the fears and the worries just kind of, they went down a few notches, and my brain was able just to focus on Jesus, and it was such a gift. So I would just encourage people, focus on God's love for you and see and pay attention to how God expresses his love to you every single day in multiple ways. And then, in terms of loving others right now, in some cases, loving others means you need to stay home. We have a lot of COVID cases going on around us, and in some cases, you just need to stay home for a few days, and that's the most loving thing you can do. Loving others is the ability to think through. I would challenge the church with this. Who are some people who are living in isolation this Christmas? Maybe it's a senior who's living in a retirement home. Maybe it's somebody who's on quarantine because of getting a positive COVID case. Who do you know that's in isolation this Christmas? And what's something that you could do? A phone call, pulling up to their house and dropping off some baked goods for Christmas. What's something you can tangibly do that just tells them, hey, you're valuable, you matter, I love you, and I'm so grateful for you. There's just so many ways, but those are a couple things we can do right now to show love to people.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing those with us today, and hopefully that is our heartbeat this week, especially as we are just a few days away from Christmas. This desire to experience God's love in our lives and how we're pouring this out into the people around us. And so, Kirk, thank you for joining the podcast today. Thank you for our listeners. Hopefully you can join us again. I think this might be the last podcast of the year. I'm not sure if we're doing one next week, most likely not. So I will see you all, I guess, in the new year, 2022. All right. Thanks again.